All right, this is a special episode. I got another family member coming on, my brother-in-law, Richard McPheters. How you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. So Richard and I, obviously we're family, married into his family. I was so looking forward to having this conversation because I feel like out of anybody in my life outside of my wife, you and your sister and I have had the most like in-depth conversations because you guys have no filter in family functions, which is great. And so I'm interested to kind of
Absolutely.
like organize these thoughts and like really dig into it. So I'm super excited. But
Absolutely. Me too.
uh, so let's set the stage. You're living in Chicago. You've been there for how many years
Yeah.
now?
I'm coming up to 8 years. So 2 years and I get my stars.
2 years and you get your stars. There you go, man. And then
Yeah.
before that, after school and everything, you were out in, or during school, you were out in San Francisco, right?
No, I went to college in San Diego. I lived there for 6 years, and then I lived in San Francisco for about 3 years.
Right on. Okay. So, what, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but like you, Richard, right now, what is your faith or spirituality, religion, however you want to define it? What's that for you?
Yeah. So to put it uh, bluntly, I I don't believe in God. I, for the most part, despise religion. From a faith perspective, I don't look at faith as a belief system in something higher than me. I more so am more introspective in like a belief of faith. So, what am I doing? How am I approaching the world? Who is Richard? What is the impact Richard's making? Not what do I need to do to be worthy of this existence of a higher power or worthy of this entrance into another land once I'm, no longer on this plane, that kind of thing. That is, I feel like, categorizes what would be atheist, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
But I also like don't necessarily spend the time like thinking about faith, if that makes sense, or
Yeah.
taking the time to like categorize myself within a faith or within an understanding of faith. I think, as we'll talk about, I'm sure like the journey getting to this point was a longer road, but today, Richard, I spend my time thinking about things that are impactful today, right now, the people around me, the people I love, the impact I'm making on this world and the people around me, the people I love, versus this other belief system in something that I don't necessarily understand or know of or believe in. So, yeah.
So the religion then it sounds like for you is more of like when you come into this world, leaving it better as you found it, sort of thought process. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think, and we'll get to this for sure, but like I am my, religious belief system. I am my God, for that matter. I am the sole proprietor of the decisions that I'm going to make and the actions that I'm going to make, throughout my lifetime. And I would hope that my belief system and like my journey and what got me here and what I leave behind is sort of that idea that a lot of people sort of create for like another entity. I'm doing it for myself. I'm doing it for my people, for my community, versus a floating, shiny man in the sky.
I what's the term that you and my wife always use? Sky Daddy. I think
Sky Daddy,
I
yes.
think it's very funny.
Sky
Okay.
Zaddy.
So let's then back up. We're not religious today, but what was it like as a kid? I mean, I'm very close with your mom and your stepdad, who's my wife's dad. So there's a lot of connections I feel that we have that we built over the years. And I'm assuming that where you are today wasn't where you were as a king or I'm sorry, a king. See,
As a
here's the
king.
thing. Here's the thing is that all of your social medias have to deal with like the phrase King Richard, and so every once in a
Uh-huh.
while I'll say kid and or I'll say king and I meant kid.
Okay.
So whatever you're doing in your branding, my point is that it's working. So
It's
congratulations on
working.
that.
Good.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
yeah, that's ideal.
Congrats.
Yeah. So religion as a kid. So it's not your atypical story. It's definitely like young Midwestern upbringing. I was raised Presbyterian. My concept of church and religion revolved around family because before my parents split when I was very, very young, like pre critical thinking, pre like a lot of memory, we would go to this church called Lumen Christi, and I can watch home movies, like I can watch old videos of us at this church, and I have, very, very blurry memories. A lot of people don't believe me when I say I can remember when I was two and three, but I do. Like I have memories that exceed, and maybe they are just, visions of, because I have a creative mind, I'm imaginative, whatever. But this space, and we were there always with our extended family. It wasn't just me, my mom, my dad, and my siblings. It was, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and it was a place that I remember from a very young age that we had fun at and enjoyed, right? So my early perception of religion was always positive. It was never what it is today. Obviously, there's been a lot of time between then and now, but the community aspect of that church and that faith is kind of what I can take with me today and say like that was a really good upbringing. I'm grateful for that opportunity. I am happy that I can think back on that part of my life and specific to religion and have a positive thought about or a positive memory about. I'm pretty sure shortly after my parents split, when I was again like very, very young, we would still go to church, but I don't remember, but I think it was awkward because, there was a huge divide in our family dynamic between my mom and my dad. And most of that sort of church going was with his extended family. So I do remember us still going. And then the church closed. Again, don't remember. And then I don't have any sort of specific memory of church between then and much later on in my teen years. So I think we were, what do they call them? Cheesters?
Creasters, I think. Yeah.
Creasters, thank
Yeah.
you. Like Christmas and Easter, I always associate holidays with church and with religion from a young age and then obviously from an older age as well. But yeah, there was a really long gap in my childhood where I don't have like those associated memories to a specific space or religion or faith. And then the thing that brought us together, my mom and Jordan's dad meeting each other was sort of the shift in when religion became more of a talking point, I think, within our household. So I was 11 when they first started dating, and I remember him encouraging my mom and us to go to church with him. And I don't think him and I have ever really talked about his faith at that point in his life, him and my mom's relationship, our relationship as like a new combined family. But it was something where it was like, oh, we started going to church more regularly. And this is when I was introduced to Catholicism. So 11 was like an interesting age for me because my best friend from like the age of 4, I think, had just moved away. I was in middle school. I was going through a very awkward, not so good looking stage of my life.
As
I
we
was a
all
middle
do.
schooler.
Yeah.
I had many years until I peaked, but I didn't have like a social life. I didn't have people close to me. And through the introduction to Catholicism to the church that we started going to with Steve, I sort of had this like re-spark of community that I, didn't necessarily know at the time. I was remembering from really, really young, but it was a similar situation. They had friends at the church. They, were making a place for themselves in this, faith-based space. And through that, like, I was a product of that. And so there was a level of socialization with other families and adults. Not to say that like I was making friends at that point, but it was it was an opportunity, right? And Jordan and I are only 2 years apart. So, her and I were, I think, really close when our families combined and sort of melded together. And, we had opportunities to be in those situations and not necessarily have to be a part of the other families. We didn't have to make friends with, the kids of the other families necessarily because we sort of had each other. We had Jake. Like, Jess was totally out of the picture at that point and very much, moving on to her like formative teenage years where she like didn't want to do anything with family. But the moment I can recall, well, let me actually rewind just a little bit. So, to give you and our listeners an understanding of like where Catholicism kind of like shifted my angle of faith, religion, church. So my mom went through confirmation. My mom and Steve. I don't think Steve was confirmed like as a child, or I'm not totally sure, but my mom went through confirmation when I was probably like 15, 14, 15, 16, I think. So that's when it was like, oh, this is real, right? Like, my mom is joining this church. My mom is like becoming a member of this church, Catholicism. And Catholicism, I feel like when you learn about it at that age, like, you don't really understand like Catholicism because it's, a huge institution. And for me, religion like didn't ever have that lens because I was young when we sort of like fizzled out of church and then coming back into it. And I didn't look at Catholicism like, oh, it's this big, it's the big church. But seeing my mom commit to it, I was like, oh, she's serious. And then we were going every Sunday. We weren't, doing Christmas and Easter anymore. It was like, we're going to church regularly. And I didn't have a problem with that. I mean, obviously, like, as a kid, you like hate sitting there for an hour, not being able to move or speak or make a sound. And then in the Catholic Church, there's all the, complications of having to like get on your knees every 15 seconds, which is never fun. And like, for some reason, I would always have this like weird feeling that I was going to black out every time I'd be kneeling. And I'm like, is this just me or is everyone sitting here like on the verge of passing out in this pew? But also, like, the Catholic Church is extremely rigid. And that was made very obvious to me from, the start. Like, I didn't get up to take communion because I didn't belong in that line to receive the body and blood of Christ. So being, one of very few people in a room full of hundreds of people who don't get to do something, like, puts you in a certain mindset. But yeah, as things sort of progressed, my mom and Steve, they went through confirmation, and we were not a part of it, but like I think we were pretty aware of it. And then my mom sort of not coerced, but lightly convinced Jordan and I to go to a youth group, like, organized event there. And this was definitely like towards like 16, 17. So I had gone like a lot of years with, very little like close friends, like socialization in school, but not really like good friends, as you know, but maybe our listeners don't. Like, you and I went to adjacent high schools. My high school was like pretty cutthroat. Being bullied my whole life like didn't really give me a space in that school to have friendships or have, the urge to like meet new people and engage with my peers. But Jordan, being on your side of town, had these connections with an entirely different population of people who didn't know me and didn't have all of these preconceived, ideas of me at such a young age. And so we're at this youth group event and I meet Stephen Huber, right? And Stephen Huber just was cool. He, kind of liked emo music a little bit. And that was definitely when I was like creeping into that world. And this door opened, right? I met someone from Sycamore. We always were also like, from like a DeKalb Sycamore perspective, like butted against each other. We were like told not to like one another because we were, enemies on the field, on the sports field, whatever. And here we are in a situation where I'm like, I don't care about any of that. Like, I don't really like play competitive sports. I played sports, but like not like that. And we sat with Stefan because Joe and Stefan knew each other. And then one thing led to another, and we were going to more youth group events. Stefan and I were going to like the same shows at like the House Cafe. Like, I was making friends, right? So the world started changing, and my world started changing because there started being socialization that I had like not had for such a long time and yearned for. And a lot of that honestly comes down to like male friendships. Like, I didn't have that for a really long time. I obviously, my dad was like not really a part of the picture, even though he was. Steve was like definitely more part of the picture, but him and I had our own issues at a young age. But I didn't have like prominent male relationships at that time. And Stefan and I got along really well, and you know, it made for an opportunity to make a friend that like wasn't gonna look at me for what was a presumed sexual orientation that I hadn't been comfortable with. Like the bullying kind of revolved around that most of my like middle school, junior high, early high school life. And to have someone not look at me and like think, oh, I can't talk to this person because, he's probably gay, it was really rewarding. And then, time went by and there was the opportunity to go through confirmation. And Stefan and I had both at that point decided, like, let's do this. Like, let's, go through confirmation. His family had just done it, or his family was about to do it, so they were trying to convince him to do it. And I was like, well, I think I want to do it too. Like, I've seen my mom have a good experience with this community and this religion and this church. Like, I why not? And for me, it was very much like a why not situation. It wasn't something that I was missing, it wasn't something I was yearning for, but it was something that in turn I felt comfortable doing because I had found a community that I had been missing in my life.
So was it most was
Yeah,
it was it was it a little bit about fitting in then, or was it simply you saw the results of people that had gone through it? For example, your mom.
I don't think it was either, honestly. I think it was more so like there was a need that I didn't have like my finger on that was being fulfilled through that church and
Got it.
but that like I wouldn't have done that if I didn't have a friend in it. And it
Yeah.
was very much like I made friends with this person, and then also we got to go through confirmation together, and that made it more tolerable, obviously,
Sure.
because him and I obviously like, we're goofing off the whole time when we were supposed to be serious and learn about this faith, but we had fun with it and we made it less of a chore and more of an opportunity to like be social. And the funny thing is, like, there was never a force to do it. I was never told by anyone like you need to be Catholic, you need to be a part of this faith. So it was a conscious decision I made, but I do know, like, looking back, that I made that decision for the sake of being in a social situation and having that opportunity to, you know, make friends.
Yeah, which I think is totally fair with just like the age that you were, and like I think most a lot of kids would do that. It's just if it feels not bad, why not try if you have this sense of community and just learn more about it. So let's back up here. So we had parents; they were divorced at a very young age. Your mom met my wife's dad, and then you had a sister. So it was you and Jess, and then Jordan and Jacob. Jake, I've never
Yeah.
called him Jacob in my life. Jake,
Jacoby.
yeah, and then your mom, Rhonda, and Steve. So that was the family unit. What was the home life when it came to religion? Was it something that was celebrated and talked about, or was it something that was like more of because the way that you described it was more of a transactional, like, hey, we're gonna go to this thing and there's a sense of community. That part's cool, but like, what about the home life? Did it ever come back at home from a religious perspective?
It's fascinating because I feel like I remember us like coming home and like talking about the priest's homily, but like I don't remember that, like
Yeah.
that didn't stay with me, like that part of it. And it's interesting because like I know that's not the same experience for Jordan. Like
Hmm.
Jordan went through the very similar path that I did, like shortly after, and like there was definitely like incentivization like through
Yeah.
her opportunity of joining the church. And I mean, it's silly. Like her story is honestly silly when you talk about it because it was like over a piercing, right?
Right.
And but like for me, it wasn't that. Like for me, it was like it was a why not. It was like I have nothing to lose here. Like I'm at an age where I'm starting to make my own decisions, and like this seems like an appropriate decision to make. And yeah, I had ulterior motives in that I might not have understood at the time, but at the end of the day, it was like this isn't hurting me right now, so I should go through with it. And
Yeah.
obviously, like that last sentence, like is kind of going to be where we go next. But I just think it's interesting because it wasn't the religion, it wasn't the belief system, it wasn't the faith, it was the community, right? And that's what I
Mm.
told people, especially when I was, after I graduated and after I moved to San Diego, like that's what I told people. It was like I joined this church for the community. I felt a sense of community that I yearned for that I didn't have for a long period of time, and both due to my family dynamic changing a lot before could even like really think for myself, and then also being in a situation where I was more of a lone ranger and didn't really have a social community, let alone a community like that. So
Yeah, that makes sense. So then what happens? We started the episode by saying that you don't really have a place for religion in your life right now. How did we get from that kid taking, the catechism classes to where you are now? Like what was the Are you
the
smoking on this
catechism
podcast?
classes,
Are you smoking? What are we
it's
doing,
just
man? This is for
it's a
kids.
vape.
Oh,
This
okay.
is a vape.
Oh, that's
It's just
fine. Is it was
nicotine.
it strawberry?
No, it's watermelon.
I was close. I was really close. Yeah, so
Nicotine calms my nerves.
that's fair. That's fair. So yeah, talk me through. I mean, obviously it was probably a very very long journey, so we don't have to cover it in one gasp. But like,
Yeah.
what were like the rumblings of like where you are today?
Well, what's interesting is like I knew I was gay. I knew I
Wait, wait,
was.
wait, wait.
I
You're
knew
gay?
I'm gay.
Wow,
I'm so.
wow.
Tommy says hi, by the way.
Hey, Tommy, that's Richard's boyfriend, who we love.
I knew I was gay. I knew I was gay like probably like 13, 14. It didn't click right away. It didn't click for a while, but I knew. And going through those classes, like you're learning about this, right? You're learning about the church's like do's and don'ts and what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And there's a lot to it, right? There's a lot to the do not do list. And they spend that religion specifically spends a lot of time telling you what you can't do because they're also the ones who are gatekeeping like what you get to do once you die. And I think that is a really great tactic to manipulate people, right? Is like you will get this really great opportunity to have this like everlasting, dream state if you abide by these rules. But the rules are rigid, and you can follow some of them, but like name one Catholic who follows all those rules. I mean, at the end of the day, there is the bonus round of getting to confess your sins and still, make your way to heaven. But yeah, it was definitely conflicting, but I was suppressing so much of my sexuality while doing this, you know, experience, like getting through confirmation and becoming part of this church, that like that wasn't top of mind at all. And it's funny because, that first time you do confession, like you're supposed to talk about everything you've ever done. That doesn't meet your great list. And definitely didn't talk about that, because it wasn't something that I was comfortable thinking about, let alone talking about with a priest that you can very clearly see through the peepholes, who 1 billion% was also a homosexual. Let's be very real about that. The priest that I had to confess to was definitely a gay man. So that was, yeah, that was interesting. So I get confirmed. I have this church community, but I also built this social community through a lot of the people that you grew up with, which your school and a lot of the people within your grade, the grade below us, the grade below that, like welcomed me with open arms, and I had a really great like end of high school experience because of that. And I'm always grateful for that. And I know today that would not have happened without that youth group event at that church. That wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have gone through confirmation and made like close friends with Stefan, you know. Like those are all very, very important milestones in my young adult life. But so I graduate and I'm like 1 year Catholic and you know, I don't feel excluded when I go take communion. And then I leave. I leave all of this community that I had just built. So the church, my family, all of these new friends that I had just spent a year getting to know and you know, like getting to experience these like social experiences that I did not have for a very long time. And I moved to San Diego. My sister Jess and I moved to San Diego to basically get out because once you know that there's another thing out there, DeKalb, Illinois is in it, right?
Yeah, that
Illinois isn't it? The Midwest really isn't it?
like wait, there's an
And I got
ocean
that.
on
You're right. There's a whole ocean and there's sunsets, you
right,
know, and
right.
there's no bad days, right? In San Diego, there's no bad days. So we moved to San Diego and I tried to keep up with going to church. And one of the biggest rules is like, you have to go to church still. Like you're supposed to go to church every Sunday. You're supposed to go to confession whenever you do something that, you know, makes you not worthy to take communion. And that was hard because I had to do it all by myself. I didn't have my mom or Stefan or Jordan, you know, I didn't have my community of people who allowed me to find this faith in this church and this religion with me. So I had to do it on my own. And, you know, I made do. I found like a younger, like very college-based congregation and was going to that. And then there was this one homily and the priest was like cursing and like saying all sorts of weird stuff. And I was like, what? Like, I'm confused. Like, I thought this was way more rigid than what's happening right now.
Was it a Catholic church or was it a like a
It was a
non-denominational church?
Catholic church. It
Oh
was a
wow,
Catholic church that like held space somewhere else because it was
got it,
definitely like they didn't have the like funds to have their own space. So they were like renting out space
got it.
to
That
hold the
might have
church.
been
But
a cult. That might have been a
no,
cult.
it was definitely still because it was the same organization that
Sure, sure.
of
I'm
like the
joking.
church that I know. It was like a college based, it's called the Newman Center. It's like a college based like Catholic not sub organization, but
Yeah,
like
it's like a younger hip version of it's like Catholicism light for younger folks.
sure. But
Maybe that's wrong. I don't
not in DeKalb, but it wasn't that in DeKalb. But here I am in San Diego and I'm in a room full of people I've never met. And there's this priest and he's just like going off. And I was like, okay, so this isn't like all the same, like, which is good because that teaches you, you know, that life is a variety, life's a mixed bag. But that got me thinking. I was like, if this isn't the same, like, what else isn't the same? You know,
know.
this was also in like the most prominent period of my life where I was starting to explore other things. And I was very much in a situation that I had been in for most of my life where I was alone and didn't have a community. And it was not finding it at that church or, you know, within religion. So I started to kind of like back away from religion and church. And that's when like the rest of life started to take over the rest of the important periods of my life that sort of shaped where I am today when it comes to religion. So in San
So
Diego, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to ask a question. So, well, not ask a question, but more reframe this. So, we had a like a time in your life when you didn't have community. You know, younger, junior high time that's like terrible for everybody. My junior high sucked, as I'm sure most people's did. But I
Yeah.
had a community. You didn't have that sense of community, so you went out and found it, and you found it through Catholicism and the church, but it didn't translate over to the West Coast. Was there like why was that? Was it that you didn't have that one person that was accepting? Was it like the Seattle Freeze sort of thing, or like why don't you think that you were able to get that on the West Coast?
I don't
And
actually know the answer to that.
and a follow up question with that too is like, so why didn't you get it? And then if you had gotten it, like if you had come into that church and welcome with open arms, they were like, we love you for who you are. Come to this potluck, whatever, and it takes off. Like, do you feel like your mind would be different now, or no?
I'd say no, and I'd say I also don't know. I think I think multiple things were happening at the same time, right? Like the lack of community that I felt in one place didn't translate to the other, which wasn't the church's fault, or it wasn't anything's like it wasn't because of anything other than the fact that I wasn't in a space that I was familiar with, right? And
Sure.
I was still anxious. I was still extremely introverted then. Like I didn't want to go over, I didn't want to do peace be with you with a bunch of strangers. I hated peace be with you at the Catholic Church because I didn't want to shake anyone's hand. But I didn't want to definitely do that with people I super didn't know. I wasn't there yet in my young adult life. But the other thing too is like this is definitely like when the idea of my sexuality was like much more front of mind. And I knew the church's belief on homosexuality and being gay and what that meant, and they were conflicting, right? And I'm also at that very like naive point of my life where I'm like, I have believed forever that like I am working towards white picket fence, dream job, great education, wife and kids. I had felt that forever, and that was a burden on me. And so that the idea of like still subscribing to this very, very rigid faith system, it wasn't working anymore. And I started to pull away, and it happened organically. It wasn't like all of a sudden for sure, because I can like kind of remember where I would still like try and go. And then it was like, well, if I'm going and I'm not going to confession, like, am I bending the rules? And it's like, am I allowed to bend the rules? I don't know. So there was definitely an organic, like, step away from faith, but simultaneously, there was another very, like, prominent thing happening in my life. And that was me becoming comfortable with myself, right? And learning that there was a more authentic version of myself very much sort of tucked away. So that became sort of the new era, was like this re-exploration of Richard. And I was, very privileged to have had the opportunity to make friends with someone who very, very quickly like brought me into their community. His name is Casey. He was my best friend for several years early on in San Diego. And he, to a very direct degree, sort of helped me open my mind through a really fun fungus that some people like to indulge in,
There's a lot of
which
studies
created a
on
lot
that
of
right now, man. There's a
there's a
lot of studies
lot of
on it.
studies on that right now. It allowed me to open my mind to a different thought process that I had never allowed myself, or never knew was possible, right?
What was that thought
And
process?
that like I am the sole proprietor of everything that happens. There is no bigger than me. It's me. Like
Hmm.
at that time I was silly and definitely like, spending a lot of time enjoying this fungus and, learning about my mind. But I was also like under this mentality where like I am God. I am my own God. Like I am the creator of every thought, every action, every doing that will occur in my lifetime. Why do I believe in this, sky daddy? Like why do I believe in this sky daddy when like I don't it doesn't translate. And through, expanding my mind and exploring, critical thinking and self-will and thought for the first time, and becoming more comfortable with my sexuality, like it was really easy for me to walk away from everything that I was ever told or shared, or, given the opportunity to see, and start new. Like it was this new era where it was like, who is Richard? What is Richard? What am I now? How am I going to define myself right now today? and what do I want to work towards to define myself for the future. And none of that revolved around an entity that floats in the sky and following all these rules to then like make your way into this like everlasting, you know, dreamscape.
Sure.
And
That.
so I was done. I was done. I had no interest. And, you know, like I came out really shortly after that. Like, I'll tell you, I'll tell everyone, like, if it was not for hallucinogenics, like, I would not have come out when I did. Like, I had never, ever, I mean, it was the first time too. It was the first time being like transported to that state of mind where I was able to fully like I went to bed that night and I said out loud, I'm gay. Like
Wow.
that's how serious it was. Like it was transformative and it allowed me to see myself for who I was and allowed me to feel comfortable for the first time being who I was without any repercussions. And for me that meant like, well, if this is how I feel and there's not a consequence because I don't feel a consequence, then I don't belong to this institution and I don't belong to this belief system.
Yeah.
And then obviously like play with fungus, smoke a lot of weed, and then next thing you know, you're like doing TED Talks in kitchens with your closest friends about how the religious institution is corrupt. And, you know, I don't
So
really need to talk to that because that's a very heavily thought out belief system. But
yeah, I mean, it's you were able to unlock something in your mind, which I think is really really cool. People come to that conclusions on like thousands of different ways. Yours worked for years for you. I do have
mhm,
I have a question on. So we experiment with unlocking your mind, and it happens. How do you get from I want this sense of community to now this community doesn't respect who I am as a person, to then making the jump to being so disillusioned with religion that you don't even want any part of it, no matter the denomination? How do you make that leap, and what was that process like for you?
yeah, I think it comes down to me really sort of realizing that we are lied to a lot as children. We are told things, anything really, too, like literally anything as children because our parents choose to do that. And at this point in my life, I realized like I need to learn a lot on my own. I need to take the opportunity to forget everything I was ever told and relearn it on my own path. So to do that, like, I mean, obviously faith, religion, but I knew that I had community in myself. It was
Hmm.
like one of the first times I loved myself, right? And it was one of the first times I was able to say, like, I don't need to have 100 people in a room to feel safe. I don't need to have that same sense of community that I always yearned for to feel good about myself because I have myself, because I got myself here and I'm making this decision and I'm walking this path. And it allowed me to pick myself up and move forward, right? And I knew that it was going to be challenging. Like coming out was one of the most challenging things I've ever done because like here I am, you know, having just become Catholic like 2 years prior and having to explain to my mom that like I'm breaking one of the biggest rules in her faith that she is still very strongly associated with, you know? That was mortifying. But I knew I had to do it because I needed to relearn Richard. I needed to explore Richard, and I could not do that with the barriers that were set out for me from, you know, childhood, from everything I was ever taught, from everything I ever experienced. You know, it was all clouding my ability to accept myself, move forward, and like find what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. So the lack of community wasn't a problem anymore. The lack of community plus all of the things we've previously talked about allowed me to, you know, grab my own hand and walk forward and take my own baggage and walk forward.
Yeah. Did you ever believe in God?
I think so. I think I always wanted to believe in God because I felt like, you know, there was a long time, even in my early 20s, where I would be like, you know, like if it comes down to it and I'm at the gates of heaven and he asks, like, why didn't you believe in me before he like pulls the trap door and drops me to hell? Like, I'll be like, because you didn't give me a good reason to. Like, first of all, you kill everyone. Like, hello, war? Really? Like, you're a joke, dude. Like, no. But I always had this mentality where it's like, if it came down to it, like, he'd look at me and he'd say, like, you're a good person. And that's all that matters. But I'm like, I'm not going to live my life to abide by this, like, scripture that is ultimately a derivative of men, that doesn't allow me to be myself. Like, it didn't matter anymore. And yeah, to answer your point, like, yeah, I did believe in God, and I think I wanted to continue to believe in God, but it was like, I'm not going to believe in this anymore. And if it comes down to it, and he's real, and I'm gooped and gagged, like, oops. But like, I'm still a good person, so I think I meet your criteria, right? And that criteria definitely fits into like a much more like modernized like Christian belief than like a Catholicism belief. But
Yeah.
yeah,
How,
no, I definitely think if God is real and I'm confronted with him judging me, he's going to be like, you did really fucking great.
I want definitely want to talk about the responses to from friends and family when you did have that conversation with them about being a gay man and who that. Oh, there's a second one. There we go.
Sorry.
Cheers. What conversations with yourself, if any, did you have about your mortality or afterlife? Catholicism, I think, in my view, definitely uses some scare tactics, and my religion as a kid did that as well, where it's they hang the carrot out in front of you so that you can go get it, and then there's the stick falling behind it. So after knowing that this isn't supporting who I am as a person anymore, what happens then to conversations with yourself about what happens when you die? Because that's obviously a huge part about Christianity, Catholicism, all that.
So through unlocking parts of my brain and the use of fungus, I adopted this mentality of nothing happens to you when you die, and started thinking about death more scientifically. And to a lot of people, it's really scary. And I understand, and through like very stone conversations, I understand why people are religious and why people believe in God. Because like that concept of nothing happens to you when you die is absolutely terrifying. Like, you just go and that's it, and it's just dark forever. But I was starting to think about it from this very like scientific mentality where it was like, yeah, that's just it. And so why not like live your life unabashedly right now, so that by the point you reach where you're confronted with death, like, you're not like, oh shit, I didn't get to go do this like really grander thing that I always wanted to do. So it definitely gave me that sense of living in the moment, but also like, this is your path, dude. Like, if you die tomorrow, like, you die tomorrow. And I can tell you, like, right now, like, I don't fear death. I don't have this like sense. I mean, I fear the like lead up to death, especially like getting sick and like dying, but I don't fear the end, right? Because I don't feel like I missed out. I don't, and I wouldn't have done that if I didn't get here through all of these, previously stated experiences. Like, I feel like I've lived a life. I'm 35 years old, and I've lived a pretty privileged and extraordinary life. And I'm very proud of myself for being able to have that realization. But I also know there's more to live, right? And I want to do more and I want to see more. But if it was to be my end tomorrow, like, I did it. I did what I needed to do to get to that day. And I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid for nothing to happen when I die, because I won't know it. And scientifically, I'm just releasing my energy and the circle of life will continue. I am more focused on like legacy and experience and like leaving things better than I like found them, than I am like, well, I want to make sure that I'm really good so that by the time that I'm no longer here, I'm greeted by my dog Pepper in heaven. Like, no, that's not, I'm not going to live my life that way. It's not authentic. It's not, it's not fulfilling, honestly. It's rigid, and That's scary. That scares me, honestly. The fact that people will abide by a code that is placed onto them by men who existed thousands of years ago in order to like have a life after this life. Like I don't want a life after this life. Like this is the only life I want.
Sure. Living for the now versus living for what's to come, which
For
I
sure.
can personally relate to that.
I love it.
So let's go back then. You have the experience, you finally come to the realization that you're gay. What is that conversation like? And again, like this is a very, very personal thing that we're talking about, Richard.
Absolutely.
Like coming out and share whatever you're comfortable with. But I think
Yeah.
that
No,
coming out
I'm an open
stories
book.
are they're beautiful. I love to hear them. What I don't love to hear is the aftermath of what comes next.
Right.
Not to allude to anything, but what was that experience like for you?
It was challenging, right? Because it's me being comfortable and me wanting to be authentic for the first time, really. Like most of us had the opportunity to like walk across that line much younger, but when you're hiding like a pretty big secret, like having a sexuality that doesn't fit the mold of like what you were taught was right and normal your whole life, like it's pretty fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
But I was no longer like willing to like sit behind that door or sit behind that line. And I came out pretty quickly to like the closest people to me. My sister was the first person I came out to, Jessica, and the conversation went really well. And then I started like trickling that truth into friendships, and I told my best friend who introduced me to, you know, this altered state of mind that I was in love with it, you know, like I started to be a lot more comfortable with the idea that the American dream that I was told was what I wanted was false, and that I could recreate that concept, right? And that it became the hardest part was including people into that truth that I was afraid would not want to hear it, because let's be very, very clear. Like Richard was gay at 7. Richard was gay at 4. Richard was very, very gay at 11.
I've seen some of the what like
The
the dances
footage,
that you and Joe
the
have put
foot.
together. So I mean, yeah,
I mean,
not to say that doing in sync dances make you
I was
gay,
doing
but
full drag at like the age of 5 years old. So like, I think we were all aware, but I think
oh
that
man,
people were comfortable with the idea of my eccentricities and my creativity, to know that like if that was the case, like I would find the time to realize it. No one pushed me. No one told me that it was wrong. Like I didn't grow up in a. I'm so privileged and grateful that I didn't grow up in a household where like I felt like I was going to be dismissed or banished by finding that reality or accepting that reality. But there's also this religion aspect, which is why we're here, that, you know, my mom was very much adhered to and very much is still adhered to. And she was honestly like the last closest person to me that I had the conversation with. Because after her, it was like the family that I don't really love or love to talk about, and then extended family that like I wouldn't necessarily have the conversation with. But a lot of it too, and I think this is a perspective like a lot of people should know, is coming out is basically telling someone like the type of genitalia that you want to touch or have in your mouth. And like
yeah,
for me, it was like, why would I have that conversation? Like, I don't want to have a conversation with my mom about who I want to have sex with. Like, so I wanted to come out when I had someone to like show her that I had love and affection for.
got it.
I didn't have that opportunity because I hadn't found that yet, but I didn't see the reasoning in coming out preemptively before being in a relationship, or you know, because for me it was still uncomfortable. It wasn't like, oh yeah, I want to tell you about my sexual desires. Like no, I don't want to do that. Like my grandma, like I don't want to tell my grandma like whether or not I love to eat tacos or hot dogs. Like she doesn't need to know that. Like I don't want to kill her.
What a visual you just gave us. Thank you for that.
Hot dog, taco, hot dog, taco, or both. Some people like
Yeah.
both. Some
Hey,
people
God
like
bless.
ham sandwiches. Some people. I'm sorry.
Sure, keep going. Keep going. What other analogies
I'm
can you?
done. Food is over. Food is canceled. But that was like very much so reaching the point of where I was like, well, am I really being fully honest if I'm not disclosing all of this, right? And my mom was, again, like the last closest person to me that I needed to tell. And it was the hardest conversation I have. And I have a friend who took a photo of me while I was on the phone with that phone call. I have posted
Wow.
that for coming out day. Like I have told my testimony on social media before. Like it was like really, it was intense. But it was really positive. And I know that like she would tell a very different version of the story because it was very, very challenging for her. I don't think at any point in from when she was confirmed to that moment had she ever had to like start questioning a lot of the beliefs that she had been taught in her journey of faith through Catholicism. And I know, I mean, she's been very, transparent with me, like not necessarily right then in the moment, but after the fact about how challenging it was, she had to sit down with her, trusting priest and have that conversation like, does God love my son? And I'm grateful that she sat down in front of, the right priest who, again, I very wholeheartedly think was a homosexual or still is a homosexual. And he, gave her the opportunity to not look it through the lens of these like rigid rules and more so like, okay, so as our belief system unfolds, like who does God love? And it's like all of us, right? Like, was he born in God's image? Yes. Does he, is he like a good person overall? Yeah, God loves him, right? Like, regardless of the fact that he's gay. And I think that, you know, thankfully to this priest and the conversations that my mom had with him and the counsel that my mom sought, through my sister and through, family and other people, like she was able to devise her own perspective and opinion about how she felt about me and my sexuality that was not restrictive or limited to a belief system that was written again by like men thousands of years ago. And as we both know, like there's nothing in the Bible about being gay or about the sin of being gay. So, but more so like the newly adopted, I would call it legislation of the church is very anti. So that was like a winning moment for me to be able to like know that my mom still loved me because I'm definitely like the baby of my like biological family.
Well,
So
you're a mama's boy.
exactly, like my mom
And
was
that
my girl. I
and
love
that's
her. Telling
that
her that I was like breaking the big rule was hard.
right.
Like
Exactly.
the fear of her hating me, but I knew she could never hate me, And a lot of people don't have that opportunity and don't have that same experience. So it's unfortunate, but I am grateful and so 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 privileged to have had her be able to look at me and say, "I love you no matter what."
That's amazing. I think that's super beautiful. I just wish that more people could have that experience because I mean,
Absolutely.
God, like as a straight white man, I don't know if I will ever know the difficulty of having that type of conversation. So I just, kudos to you just on the side
Thank
there.
you.
Not even on the side, directly. Kudos directly to you.
Thank you so much directly.
So what is then your faith now? Like we've talked a little bit about like you are your own God and that concept of what that means of like that more of that free will. I create my own thoughts. I create my own, whatever it is that you're dealing with at that time. But is there ever a desire to understand some of the other complexities in the world? Some of the things that sometimes religion can help answer. The beginning of the world, what happens in the cosmos, galaxies, like all these like fascinating things that sometimes people just, point to God and say faith. God created it. I believe in God and that's my faith. What does that world look like for you other than the internal God concept that you've created?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think the best answer I could give, like having kind of told you my journey, is like it's none of my business. Like I can't understand quantum physics, let alone the universe. Like looking up at the stars terrifies me to all shit.
Wait,
And
why? Why does that terrify you?
just like the idea of it, I have a fear of space. I don't know if you know
Okay.
this.
Did you watch
Like get
Apollo
me in
13
a
as a
room.
kid?
Yeah, I don't really remember. I'm more talking like more recently. I realized this. Like the first time I saw Gravity, and I was like
Oh, yeah.
fully like drenched in sweat and like had the jits. I was like, oh, I think I'm afraid of like really large infinite spaces or
Sure.
space rather.
But I think, I guess the reason why I
It's
asked
not for
that,
me to understand, I think. I don't think that it's for me to understand because that's so like beyond where I'm focused. Like I'm focused on like immediate and like very specific things that can be changed and can be paid attention to. I'm not trying to find the answers or find what's out there or who created us or how we got to this. I'm trying to focus on more like tangible things like why are we so divisive as a society? Why do people continuously, especially from a, like a Christian and religious perspective, spread hate? Like, I it's not for me to understand because it's not an immediate need for me or in my perspective a lot of people. I don't think that we should be spending our time trying to figure out where we came from or how we got here and like what's out there. We need to focus on like how to take care of each other and how to be good people and protect one another.
so you don't have these thoughts at all, or is it you have these thoughts and you just brush it away? Because I'm trying to get,
I
because
don't
like
have I
I
don't have these thoughts at all. I don't think about it. Like because I don't think about what happens to me when I die. I just know that I want to like leave a mark.
sure.
I'm thinking so like so currently that those types of thoughts just don't really ever come into my mind. And when they do, it's fascinating, right? So like where those thoughts come into mind are through conversation. Like I have people in my life who are still very religious and who, live a very like faith-based life. And I don't talk to them like they're dumb or like, like they're wrong and I'm right. I'm curious like how they got there, just like, probably why you started this podcast. Like it's fascinating, but after that conversation, like I'm not sitting there like, oh, I wonder why.
Hmm.
It just isn't, it's not important to me to like have that like pinpointed perspective.
Do you think that that's because of the community that, I mean, because right now you're very, very heavily involved in the LGBTQ plus community in Chicago. You have a great network of friends there. I believe you were that way in San Francisco as well, having that sense of community. Do you feel like some of that comes from, this is what they call a leading question. Do you think that some of that comes from the fact that a lot of your community is still disenfranchised and not accepted, and so we have to worry about like boots in the ground versus like what's happening in the cosmos? Is that kind of what the answer is?
Yes and no. So I think it took me a really long time to stop hating religion and hating religious people. I think 5 years ago, 7 years ago, I would have had a very different conversation today, or with you about this.
More
I
anger?
think more anger for sure, the
Yeah.
disenfranchisement of like the communities that I'm a part of or support or have, close ties to are definitely like receiving a very terrible like end of the stick as far as the impact of religion and faith. And I'm not saying everyone is that way, but I'm saying there are a lot of people in the world who use their religion to harm others. But to step away and to take a step back, and I think, the last 4 years have taught me a lot about perception and like how my beliefs don't necessarily have to be like the the leading causes to, why I don't want to hear someone's perspective. Like I
Sure.
can stop thinking and actually active listen to get some understanding, right? I don't think it crosses my mind anymore because I'm not focused on it in my direct life on my day to day. Whereas, 5, 6, 7 years ago, like I was angry, right? Like you said, like the disenfranchisement like caused me to be upset and to look at religion and look at faith with such a negative perspective because of that hurt and that pain that I could see actively, like on the faces of human beings and in, legislation and within the communities that I was being supportive of or a part of. And having like fought that fight for as long as I have, I'm definitely at a point where I was like pretty close to burnout and like needed to take a step back. By taking a step back, I've allowed myself to not like jump the gun and look at people face value for their belief system, and be more inquisitive and ask more questions. And but it only exists in those rooms. It doesn't exist outside of that. I'm not sitting there, at the end of my workday like, I can't believe that person believes in God.
Mm.
Like, why would they possibly do that? Like, are they crazy? Like, I'm not thinking about that. Like, I understand. Like, I I'm smart enough and I've like had enough life experience to know 1 billion% why people believe in God and in faith and in religion. I get it. It's a great concept. It's a great institution for the people that benefit from it. The people who don't benefit from it, get hurt by it, which is an extreme problem. But like that's where like my fighting force goes now, is like how within the impact that I can make on this earth, on this planet, affect my communities and the communities I support in a positive way that eliminates some of that disenfranchisement, eliminates some of that hate and that anger from the other side. But I have to turn that off because it eats you alive. I mean, the last 6 years were like extremely difficult for me because a lot of times, especially in like the family unit, I felt like I was a sole proprietor in that confrontation,
Mm.
and I was the only person who was trying as hard as I could to actively listen to the other side in a lot of the rooms I was in. And I would just lose my mind, and it just festered so much, and it made me like feel hatred and so much anger towards the people that I was in those rooms with. And I don't want to feel that way. I want to be able to care about people to a degree and to a level, and still allow them to have their own journey to that point where they got to that room.
How do you even do that though when you're talking with people that might not agree with who you are as a person? Like I've always found that fascinating. It's like I like you think I chose to be gay, first of all, and second
Yeah.
of all, like like there's no like you've already like you Richard and every other gay person out there are already starting behind the finish line to be able to then catch up to the finish line of like where you think the baseline should be. So how do you even have that conversation with people that fundamentally don't understand who you are?
The first thing I do is I don't take it personally anymore. I used to take it extremely personally,
But how
and I
how do you
just
not
can't.
take that personal? How like
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
I I don't know. So I have applied this like thinking in my like professional and personal life of like not overreacting and active listening, and that's allowed me to succeed in my career. So I'm like, okay, let's apply that to real life. And in doing so, it allows you to hear someone's perspective more than the unconscious bias that you have received from looking at them, hearing one word, knowing, what church they belong to. Like, take the time to just stop, just shut the fuck up. And even if you disagree with that person, like, as long as they're not like beating the shit out of you or committing a hate crime or like actively harming you or the people that you love and support and are in the same community as, like, listen, just listen, because there's going to be like a pretty telling story of how they got there, and that perspective is like their perspective. Like, they're there because of the cards they were dealt, just like I'm here because the cards I was dealt. And then from there, after you've allowed yourself to like listen and not jump in and not say like, well, you're wrong and you're harming me and you're harming my community, say like, well, how do we find a common foundation that we can like both like sit upon, and then allow that to be like our safe space, and then move on from there. Like, you were a part of those conversations, Miles, like you saw me in the confrontation that I was like forcing upon our family in the last 6 years when things were pretty divisive and pretty turned on their head. And I got to a point where I had to just stop putting myself into everything that I was hearing and just
Mm,
hear it and then
mm,
ask
ah,
questions like, "Oh, you're here? Well, how did you get here? Like, what what got you here to where you have this belief system and you're making these decisions? Like, what got you there?" Because that's what I'm curious about. Like, how? And then when you hear that, you're like, "This all makes sense." And like, yeah, you're still wrong and I'm still right, but like, I don't have to tell you that you're wrong and I'm right because I understand why you're here. Like I understand the sequence of events that got you to this belief system. And now that I know how you got here and I don't just look at you like, like you're a brain dead human being who just believes everything they hear, we can start to develop a progressive conversation around like, okay, what do we both believe in? Like, what do we both think is important? Where is our commonality? Okay, now we have a commonality. Like, let's build from there. And obviously, like you're going to build from there and you're going to hit a weak spot in one or the other person's, armor, and you're going to drop back down, but you're not dropping back down to the bottom. You're dropping back down to that commonality. You're dropping back down to that foundation that you had just built that allows you to trust this person, trust to hear this person. So, yeah.
that's no, that's a very very good explanation. I kind of picture like a ladder where like you're
hmm
coming down to meet that person, and then you kind of like pick them up rung by rung, and then if you go too fast, then you go back down to where they are.
Yeah. And they have their own ladder, right? This ladder,
Sure.
we have dual ladders,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
I want them to bring me up their ladder. Like I want to understand why that person's here because it's so oppositional to where I'm at. And for the longest time, wouldn't allow a person in that room with me to explain how they got to that rung in the ladder. And now I know. And so it's like, oh, well, five rungs down, like we were probably at the same space, at some point in our lives. But here's what got us to where we're at today.
Yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of work just in that regard, for just like on a personal perspective. Like, yeah, I mean, it'd be tough to have a conversation, even if I agree with you, which I did. Like, probably 99% of the time, like it was tough to have conversations because you and I do this, my wife does this, where you insert yourself into the scenario, and you can't do that a lot of times, especially if you're trying to have a productive conversation. So, I've definitely seen that change, and I think you've been a lot more impactful with your conversations.
Thank
the
you.
the final question I've got for you, Richard, I think it's important to talk about how the gay community and the religious community can come together in some way. And by that I mean from the religious side, like even if you're not a religious person, for anybody, even if you don't have any faith at all, like how do people that aren't a part of your community become an ally, and how do we become an ally in that religious sense if you are somebody that goes to church and celebrates Judaism, Muslim, Christianity, whatever it is?
Yeah. That's a really complicated question.
Yeah, good luck, pal.
Good luck. I think we need to find commonality in humanity, right? Like Christianity has good intention. Most religion has good intention. A lot of it is good intention for like you, though. It's so like self-absorbed. Like, what are you gonna do? What are you doing for you? And it's like, why are we not doing what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? Like, as a society, as a human race, like, what are we doing right now? Because it's not good, right? The divisiveness that still exists is obviously a cause of a number of things, religion, politics, what have you. But I don't know, that's complicated because, there are religious gay people. The church that I became Catholic in, there was a religious gay person in that church. There was, the choir director was 1 billion% a lesbian. And, I had to ask that question like later on when, I'd come back for Christmas and go to church with my mom. Like, that's a lesbian. So, like, how does she fit into all of this? Like,
Right.
gay people exist in every pocket of society. Like we're just as common as like a freckle. I just think that the rigidness that religion has brought on to humanity has disallowed people to think for themselves, and also just dismiss people so easily based off of preconceived notion and unconscious bias. Like, just stop. Like, stop. Like, we all as humanity should take unconscious bias training. Like, that obviously was like forced into corporations like in the last couple of years, which I don't know about yours, but mine was so dumb and not very well thought out or
Yeah,
funded. But
yeah. I mean,
I
anytime you go the
think that
corporate
that's like
route,
a good start. Like, we look at each other with our perspective of one another. We're not
yeah,
looking at each other from their perspective of their person and their life. And that's the issue, right? Like, I'm not giving this hyper extremist religious person the time of day because, you know, they're not meeting my needs as, a fellow human being. But what good is that going to do? I'm never going to be in a room with them. I'm never going to allow myself to be in a room with them if I'm looking at them like they're the worst person on the planet. So, like, take all of that out of the picture and create that space where it can be like, okay, what are we? We're both human beings. Okay, we're both a part of the United States of America. We both live within a capitalist society. And just like start finding those commonalities, because what that's going to do is create that foundational web that allows you to say, okay, well, we're both this, but like, why are we treating each other so differently? And we don't need to be like. There's obviously always going to be extremists within society because, as human beings, like, we have free thought, but those that don't sort of fit into those like edges of extremism have the opportunity to learn. And I just think it's a cop out for those that say like, well, no, I don't want to learn. Like, I know what I know and that's it. Period. Like, well, that's fucking bullshit. Because you're ultimately saying like, I am making zero space for more. And that's really like unfortunate for them because they're not going to live a very great like rest of their life if they're not going to open themselves up to newness, evolution, conversation, change.
yeah. You can't fix stupid, but you can help people come to conclusions. But the people that don't want
Hmm.
to even fix their own stupidity, which is hard to even know that you're stupid, I guess. But
Right.
if they have no interest in education and like, even if you're the most religious person in the world, you want to learn more about your own religion. Why wouldn't you want to learn more about the people that attend your
Yeah.
church or the people that you're living amongst? So, no, I think that's a good
Well, it's
answer.
also it's also I think there's like another like there's a caveat to that too, and it's an uphill battle, right? Like I look at a part of society with like a pretty severe side eye because of the way that they're portrayed in media,
Mm,
and they're portrayed in the politics that ultimately they're supporting or the people that they're putting in front of those cameras or in front of those microphones and vice versa. But from my perspective, like right now, there's like this really, really terrible challenge of not as a gay person or a trans person or someone within the LGBTQ plus community, like to not look and be visible to the other side as a criminal or as someone who's doing something wrong. Whereas, like, we're actively looking at most of those people like that, right? Like, I mean, we as the side of humanity that loves and supports one another are actively looking at the other side of humanity. Like, you're actively creating legislation that's restrictive and harmful. You're saying things that are divisive and, creating like dangerous environments. Like they're doing something harmful. And then the other side of it is like, we're being perceived as people who are probably doing harm. Like there's the whole conversation about gay people being groomers and, like, I mean, to get very like thinly into the trans conversation, like the perception of trans people is like obviously like very wrong from people who don't understand transness and the trans community. But that's an uphill battle because like you can't even get into that room if someone thinks that you're a criminal or if someone
sure.
thinks that like where you are in your life or what got you to there is wrong. But I think that the unfortunate part of that, and this will be like 10 more podcasts, but like our battle isn't like allowing them to have a platform. It's we can't ever get to the platform, right? As an LGBTQ plus person, like we'll never be able to get to that platform because we'll have had to climb Mount Everest where like for us they're standing like on top of the Chick-fil-A.
What's that quote? We don't want a piece of the pie, we want a different pie. Like
Yeah.
just being able to come Chick-fil-A, yeah. I had this joke that if I was ever a stand-up comedian, it was going to be a joke that centered around a gay chicken sandwich. I don't know how I'm going to work it in there, but there's something there, and I can't quite figure it out. By the way, another speaking of jokes, did you ever see that kid on TikTok that was like, I know what LGBTQ is, but I don't know what LGBTQ plus is. Is that like the premium version of gay? It's just like this little 12-year-old kid that was just asking a question,
Oh
had
my
no idea.
God. He had no idea. That's so
Yeah,
cute
no
because, like,
idea.
that's, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn.
Totally, totally. And it's I am far from a perfect person, and there's still things that like I'll say something and I'm like, why did I just say that? And it goes back to like your childhood and like just things become ingrained in you, and you have to work so hard to get that stuff out of your brain to then get the new stuff in, and it takes work, and you have to want to do it. And I think I've had it probably easier than most because I've had you in my life, I've had Joe in my life. I have a cousin that is gay that just got married to a beautiful gentleman last year. So like all these things, they start to be introduced to you, but people don't. Not everybody has that. Not everybody just has it
Yeah.
easy.
But
Where
you
like,
just said it, though. You just said it, Miles. Like how easy is it for you to know someone and to give someone space? It's
mm,
hard to like re-educate yourself and to like put in the work to be better and to create, understanding in communities that you don't necessarily belong to. But how easy is it to just create space for someone to come into your life who has that different perspective? And that's really like that's the ticket right there is allow yourself to like be uncomfortable for 20 minutes just to be exposed to a part of humanity that you don't belong to. Like the thing I'm saying right now, my current like projection into the world is like we as human beings all need to know someone who is non-binary or sober or neurodivergent because we do not give like those three very like prominent aspects of our society enough like floor room. And that, I mean, obviously like there's the entire LGBTQ community that like a large portion of our population like doesn't understand, but like those are three very very common spaces within our society that are very contemporary as well, that we do not give ourselves the allowance to create space for because we don't invest in that,
right? No,
and it's important to do so.
1000%. And my hope is that it just keeps becoming mainstream like it already is. I mean, think about where we were two
Yeah.
years ago and talking about trans people or pronouns. The perfect example, my wife and I went to one of my favorite bands here in Madison a couple weeks ago, and I didn't really know a lot about them. I just love their music. I'm not a person that like digs into who they are as people. I just like the music. And these guys come on stage, and like when you hear the lead singer, like it's very clearly a dude, right? And they come on stage and they're in a dress. I'm like, what is going on here? It's like, is this a performance piece, or like what's happening? And like Joe and I looked it up later, and it's like, no, she had come out as trans last year and was just like, this is who I am. Her voice is so unique, but I was forced to be confronted with that, like face on, like hearing my favorite band, singing my favorite songs live, and not having the image in my head match up with what I'm seeing on stage. Didn't affect the
Hmm.
performance at all. It didn't affect my relationship with how I respond to the music. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't uncomfortable. And I'm hoping to get to the point where I don't have to think about being uncomfortable. I can
Right.
just be in the world. You can be who you be. I'll be who I
The
be.
uncomfortableness is the hard part, right? Though, like that's
Totally,
the challenge.
totally.
Whereas, like being in the room and creating this space, and that's the easy part. Like just be there. Yeah, it's going to be uncomfortable because you're altering a perspective in your mind that didn't exist or existed very much in a different direction for the entirety of you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not gonna like ruin your life to
Right.
continue standing in that room, you know?
Sure.
Like it's pretty easy to just stand there or just
Just
have a
be.
conversation or read something. People, I hate reading, but like read something, like get a different perspective and allow yourself to turn you off and just see it for what it is.
Yeah, I love that. Richard, thanks so much for doing this. This was
Thank
it was
you.
everything I wanted it to be. I respect you immensely as a person. Any person that has to come out and tell the world who they are without it just being known, I think it's sad and it's exciting and happy all at once. And I'm just so thankful I get to be a part of your family and I get to know you better as a person. And I can't wait for what happens in the future. And again, just thank you for coming on.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much, Miles. I love you.
Love you too, pal.